So now I'd like to turn to our next guest, Mr. Chris Anderson. Chris is a model railroader and credits model railroading to other things that he has been able to accomplish in other hobbies. And I found this really fascinating when I first met Chris and we started talking about this, because this is the philosophy that I've been preaching for some time to the Professional Model Makers Association and other groups, because I really believe that the skills that young people and middle-aged people learn from model railroading can lead to really long-term, very, very solid careers as model makers in this world. And I think that this is kind of the message that Chris has and that we've talked about. So Chris, I welcome you and thank you so much for being here this evening. I look forward to hearing about your modeling and what you're accomplishing.
Yes, Jim, thank you very much for inviting me, and hello to everyone that's out there and watching us. So as Jim mentioned, very early on in life, it was model railroading that caught my interest. It actually started probably when I was 3. My dad ran a steam engine on a piece of track in the basement, and if I remember correctly, someone had to physically hold me back because I was so excited. I just wanted to jump at this train, and because it was exciting. It was moving parts. It was just fascinating to me. Then you see it in real life. This big train goes by, and then that cements the interest in trains. So I was a early teenager by the time I started really dabbling in model trains. Getting an engine, a couple cars, a caboose, a piece of straight track, and some scenery. Just running it up and down the track, but really it was learning. It was learning about how to build the cars, how everything interacted with each other, the alignment of the track, the alignment of the couplers, what works, what doesn't work. All of that was kind of building a foundation for future skills and future hobbies of mine. So before I get into some of the pictures that we've got to show with other hobbies that I have, I'm going to go through a small list of some things that I've, some fundamental things that I've learned through model railroading. The first thing is the eye-hand coordination and the ability to smoothly and comfortably control your hand. For any of the model railroaders that have been doing this for any amount of time, you know that if you don't have a steady hand, if you're too quick, if you're too abrupt with your movements, the model represents that when you're finished. Whereas if you're smooth and you can control your hand, control all those motions, the final product usually ends up a lot better. I learned a lot about tools. You learn about different cutting tools, grinding tools, files, airbrushes, paint brushes. You learn how materials interact with each other. What do I clean before I paint it? What can I get away with not cleaning before I paint it to create a different effect? Should I glue this? Should I screw it together? Or should I use some other means? Should I tape this together? Should I use plastic? Should I use metal or brass or even wood? Right? You'll learn all of these skills, and you find that as you progress through life and you work on other projects around the house or on your car or whatever, you realize that, hey, I should think about this. Should I brace this? Should I glue this? Should I screw this together? It all kind of goes back to things that I learned when I was model railroading. I still model railroad, but initially when I was model railroading, all of that just kind of built that foundation for me. So if we could go ahead and share the slideshow. So here's an image of a couple items that I made. So if I age myself, I graduated high school in 1993. And that's when I took a job out of high school. I worked at the Great Train Store in the Mall of America in Minneapolis. Then I had some free cash and I had a discount. So I was buying trains, and then I could explore different things. And with what you see here, the Great Northern car, that was, I believe, an Intermountain kit. I replaced the roof walk with the perforated metal, I think it was Plano that made that. Added some extra details, custom painted it and decaled and weathered it myself. So you learn a lot of techniques throughout that process. The Doodlebug there, I had seen a picture and thought, I really like this Doodlebug, I want my own, but I couldn't afford a brass model. So someone who's good with their eyes could maybe see that the trucks are from an EMD, like Jeep 7 or something like that. So I started with a base model of an Athearn and an Athearn passenger car kit, cut everything apart, re-glued it back together, and made my own Doodlebug. Wasn't 100% perfect or prototypical, but it satisfied my creative need to have a Doodlebug. Next photo, please. Here's another example of something that I custom painted. So being from Minnesota, the Duluth-Mesabi Iron Range, big interest for me, especially those ore cars and those big long trains, heavy trains. So when I put this together, I started with an Athearn SD40-2, but the particular model that the Duluth used was not just an SD40-2. I don't remember exactly what the model was, but it required me to do some cutting apart and adding some Details West parts to it. I figured as long as I'm cutting it up, I might as well drill some holes, add some grab irons, add a light to the top, add a snow plow and some NMU hoses. So it was when I really started learning about super detailing, I guess, a standard kit. And again, custom painted, decaled it myself. This here, I think, so 2022 now, and I probably did that in 1994, 95. So this thing's been sitting around, moving all around the country with me for the last 28 years. And I just took that photo yesterday. So you build a quality model and it stands the test of time, right? It's held up well, I guess. If you move to the next photo, so now I've built some base knowledge on model railroading. This particular image here, I made this mirror in the late 1990s, and I was going through some car books. So among trains, I'm also a car guy. I've got many hobbies, but I saw this image of a car called the Facile Vega out of France, and there was a small photo in this book that had the hood badge that looked just like this. So it's a skewed image, kind of tipped to the side, like a 3/4 view. And it was really, really small. And I thought, I really like that. I want to reproduce that just because I have this creative bug. So using my skills of interpreting drawings that I learned from model railroading, I was able to take this skewed image, redraw it in a square version, scale it appropriately, and then using some balance and just my eye, I was able to kind of put this thing together so it looked as close as I could get it to the image that was in the book. So now that I got this image drawn, I then covered the back of the mirror in like a photo frisket that you use for masking for airbrushing. I redrew the image in reverse on the back side of the mirror, then very carefully with an X-Acto knife, cut out all the areas that needed to be painted. I then sandblasted it, painted it, and then, this was the final result. I don't know if I would have ever thought about doing this if I hadn't already built the skills that I had developed from model railroading. Next image, please. All right, so another hobby of mine is stained glass. And this particular window is kind of my pride and joy. I think it turned out really well. And just the image itself, it looks, to me, it looks, pretty neat. It's kind of striking. So what you're seeing here is a combination of another hobby of mine, which is hand-applied pinstriping, so the image for maybe some of the older generation that's on the phone or on the call with us, you may remember Ed Roth and the Ratfink image that came out of the 60s. So this was an image that Ed Roth developed in the 80s, kind of when computers became more used. So this was his digitized version of the Ratfink. So me again, figuring I like that image, I'm going to reproduce it. So I scaled it off of a drawing, again, off the computer, drew it up in AutoCAD at the time. That developed my cut plan for my stained glass. I then cut all the pieces, went through the normal process of assembling a stained glass window. And then once that was complete, then with my careful, steady hand, I did the pinstriping details. So the teeth, the details in the ears, the really fine lines that kind of go around the image there, those are all painted on. And it's a product called One Shot. So it was developed for sign painting, so painting on glass. So it's semi-permanent. If I took a razor blade to that, it would come off, but it's normal handling, it's going to be fine. But again, some of this just wouldn't have been as easily possible if I hadn't already had, a smooth, kind of detailed hand and control of a brush, right? Because with pinstriping, you have these really long bristles and you load this brush up with paint. And depending on how much pressure you are applying to the glass will dictate how thin or how wide that line gets. So you have to have very careful control as you're moving through the motion to keep a thin line, a consistent line. Then you need to be able to stop, pick the brush up, and then continue with an arc down the rest of the body there. So you're thinking about, where do I start? Where do I finish? You kind of plan those details out. And, this is the end result. I'm not saying that no one could do this, but it certainly became easier for me, again, through model railroading. Next image, please. All right, you can probably hear the echo, and you can probably see in the background here that I'm in my shop. I've been building this workshop with my dad, for about the last 6 or 7 months. And the reason this is important to me, and the reason I think I can tie it back to model railroading, is there was a plan for everything here. And it honestly started 4 years ago when I bought the house, and my wife said, you can have this room for your shop. So then everything started from that point. Okay, well, what material am I going to use on the walls? Am I going to put up sheetrock? Am I going to do barnwood? Am I going to do tin? Going through all the options, going through the positives and negatives. If I do sheetrock, maybe it goes up real easy and maybe it's a minimal cost, but maybe it can't handle the fact that I might bang a tool into it or a piece of wood might go through it, and then I got to, fix dents all the time. So I go through all these options, and then when something becomes available, when I start searching for material, I can make a quick decision about making a purchase for the shop. I stained the floors, I put up all the stud walls, I installed all the tin, I've got tongue and groove ceiling, and you can see there's a few items left to go, but it's probably about a month away from being able to be fully moved in and operational. Another quick point here, you can see I've got exposed conduit on the walls. Well, from model railroading, we've all bent a piece of flex track. Some of us have hand laid our own track, and you kind of get a feel for how much do I have to bend rail to get the curve, right? You got to get to yield to get that curve to kind of stay fixed. So when you're bending conduit, if you just bend it 90 degrees and you let go, it's going to spring back a little bit. So you got to kind of understand how materials react. And again, I seriously think it's all model railroading that's helped me build the skills, to put this shop together. Next image. All right, so kind of a boring image, but there's something that can really be learned from this image. And This is the shop. This is how I did my layout of the shop. I mean, if you think about it, it's the same thing that we do with templates for switches. I want all number 12 switches. Well, then you realize your space is too small. You got to maybe use 10s and 8s and 6s, right? So you figure out what's important to you. How do I have to use this equipment? And visually, what feels pleasing with the space. Everything that we do when we design a model railroad, what elements do I want in there? Do I want a church on the hill? Do I want a neighborhood? Do I want a coal mine? Okay, so you build this list of what you want to have and what you have to have. And then you start laying it out. And you start, if you're good, you'll use little templates and you'll move these things around, and then you'll determine, okay, I can't fit the coal mine in because it's too big and it requires too much yard space. So you scrap that, and then you reconfigure everything until you finally have your layout that still pleases you. It gives you the functionality that you want, and visually it's pleasing. So for my shop, I've got multiple drill presses, a lathe, I've got a hydraulic press, I've got an air compressor, I've got a kiln for firing stained glass, workbench, table saw, toolboxes, I've got a sink. How am I going to package this? Well, the first thing I said was, let's draw it to scale and start moving them around and figure out what fits and what provides the best flow. I think it's a direct correlation to designing a model railroad. Next image. All right, so here's what some are calling a little bit steampunkish. So this is, I picked this up on a whim a couple of years ago. It's an air compressor. The tag on the motor puts it at like a build date of the early 1900s. I think it was like in the 1920s. So when I bought it, it was a functioning air compressor. You plug it in and you kind of have to spin the flywheel a little bit to get the thing going, but it would pressurize and so limited actual value, because that air tank right there is really just a piece of tin that's been brazed together. So you can't put too much PSI in it. So you can maybe pump up a bike tire, a small bike tire, but that'd be about it. But it was cool, it was cheap, and it gave me another creative outlet to build something and kind of make it a statement piece. So I mentioned that motor. You put power to it, and you kind of had to give it a kickstart to get the thing moving. So that tells me that it's dirty and I may not have good electrical contact. Goes back to maybe pulling out your grandfather's Lionel train. You put it on the track and it just doesn't quite move. So what do? You take it apart, you figure out what's gummed up, what needs to be cleaned, what needs to be lubricated, what needs to be rewired. You put it all back together, you put it on the track, and it runs. This motor had 100-year-old wiring that was cracked and frayed and quite frankly dangerous. So without hesitation, I pulled the cover off and said, I can rewire this because I know how to solder, I know how to cut wire, I understand wire gauge. So rewired the leads on the motor, took the contacts all apart, the start switch, cleaned it all up, put it all back together, lubricated it properly, did the research to identify what type of oil was best for this particular motor, put it together, plugged it in, and it's almost so quiet that you can't even hear the thing running. I took the air compressor apart, serviced that, put it all back together with some new seals, and then repackaged it on that piece of wood. And I kind of get a little picky about some of this stuff. I didn't just want an air compressor that ran. I wanted it to look balanced, and I wanted it to, visually be pleasing. So I sourced some cast iron legs off of eBay. I had the large chunk of maple already in my supply. And then I spent, honestly, about 3 weeks figuring out how do I mount all of these items together, mount it so I can get a standard off-the-shelf belt that gives me the right tension, and then mount these feet to it so that none of these holes intersected with each other. So you got 4 holes for the motor. You've got 3 holes that are through holes for that air compressor, 4 holes to mount the tank, and then I've got another 4 holes on the bottom holding all the feet together. When you look at this air compressor straight at that wood, I got everything countersunk, so you don't see any bolts or any protrusions going below that wood. A detail that I notice, but again, it's all part of the planning and understanding how things interact with each other, what's pleasing, you know, to make a nice end product. Next picture, please. And I think if I remember correctly, this is the last one. So this one may raise a few eyebrows, but this was a career of mine for about 10 years. It's a hydraulic manifold. And prior to this job, I worked as a designer at an oil refinery. So the interesting thing about working at an oil refinery and being a piping designer and then being a hydraulic manifold designer is that piping in a refinery and the plumbing inside this manifold, all the holes that connect to each other for routing oil from one valve to another, it's technically the same thing as an electrical schematic or even a track diagram or track schematic. You follow the lines. It's coming from here, it's going to there. It's going through this component on to the next component, and it interacts with a couple other components. I'm not saying that understanding a printed circuit board made me a better manifold designer, but day one, I was like, oh, a schematic. I know this, I can do this, right? So it breaks down a lot of barriers to doing many more things that others may shy away from. So hopefully I didn't go too long. I wanted to leave a little bit of time here for some questions if you had any.
You know what, Chris, we were wondering earlier on your compressor, do you have any kind of a regulator on that thing?
Yeah, so it came with, it's a pop-off valve. So you notice that electrically it's not cutting out the compressor. So all it does is it reaches a set point and then it purges a little bit of air. So if you just let it run, it would just keep going and going, and then every once in a while it would just, it kind of scares you when you don't realize or expect it. So, but yeah, and I can dial that thing down. So I've got it set to about 32 PSI just to be on the safe side. With even then, 32 PSI, if it goes, it's a little dangerous, right?
Greg, do you also plan to build a layout or do anything like that? Is the workshop your main hobby?
Yeah. So the workshop, I've been a homeowner now for about 20 years. And my first home, I was in the basement, and it's just concrete walls and it's just stuff, right? There was no visual appeal to it. It was just pure function. Then I moved to another home. I had the garage for part of my workshop. And again, you're right, it's just concrete and, you get what you get. So when I had the opportunity to build my own space, I thought, I want to do this right. And I want the space to be a source of inspiration when I go into it. So I kind of joke with my brother and some friends. There may be days when I just want to come down here and just look at my shop and say, like, I got a cool shop, right? I'm going to listen to some music. I'm going to drink some bourbon. I'm just going to enjoy the space. But I've been looking at all the space that we've got in the house, and I've been thinking, okay, where can I do a little bit of a switching railroad? I've recently been acquiring the old Ambroid and All Nation, Athearn, O-scale kits. So I've got a couple of the All Nation NW2s. I've got one of their Doodlebug kits, and I've got about 20 or so of the box cars from the different manufacturers. And, if you learn from Lance Mindheim, you can model railroad with one switch. And it's not about how much you have, it's about how much value you can get out of it. And I've studied that for quite a while, and I'm very comfortable with doing that. So there will be a layout. Yes, that's the long answer. There will be a layout.
Well, Chris, I thank you so much for being here tonight, and you've certainly proved the point that I've been trying to make for a long time, and I really do appreciate it. And like I said privately to you, we have this segment called Building Old Kits. So when you get ready to build some of those old kits, I hope you'll let me know, and we'll schedule you on the show.